I have read many books by Professor Clayton Christensen, but there are two that I feel play an important role in the life of an entrepreneur, and these are How Will You Measure Your Life and The Prosperity Paradox, How Innovation Can Lift Nations Out of Poverty, which is co-authored by Karen Dillon and an African entrepreneur, Efosa Ojomo. I met Karen Dillon here in Boston and invited her to participate in my podcast as a guest to discuss her experience of working closely with Professor Clayton Christensen and how these books have a great impact on organizations and individuals that seek to constantly innovate. Karen and I mainly talk about the impact and also the opportunities of innovation in poor countries to get them out of poverty. Karen, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks. How are you?
I am great, Karen. Thank you for your time, and I am so happy to have you here to record this episode. And we will talk many things about innovation, about the prosperity paradox, the book that you are co-author. And thank you for your time.
You're very welcome. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much. I read your bio, and seems that you were pretty much all your career as a business journalist.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
Would you mind sharing with my audience your background?
Sure. So I was a typical English major in college, meaning I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. So I sort of panicked, and I liked reading and I liked writing. I panicked and I applied to journalism school. And once I was at journalism school at Northwestern, I kind of realized that is what I want to do with my life. I love writing about ideas and sort of helping people understand things and interviewing people. So from there, I ended up getting my first job in business journalism. I worked for a magazine about the business of law, which sounds really boring, but it was really interesting.
Wow.
And from there, I worked for a magazine that focused on entrepreneurs, and then eventually Harvard Business Review.
Oh, that's good. So how you started in Harvard Business Review?
So I had been in Boston working for Inc. magazine, which is a magazine for entrepreneurs.
Yeah,
and I
I know.
loved it. It was fascinating.
It's good.
You
It's a good
probably
one.
know it is a good magazine. And unfortunately, the owner and founder of Inc. magazine got sick and then died. And so the magazine was bought and moved to New York. And in that process, Harvard Business Review reached out to recruit me to come in as, at the time, deputy editor, which was sort of a management role. And I joined and never looked back. Really enjoyed working at Harvard Business Review.
Oh, that's awesome. Initially, Karen, when I invite you to record this podcast, the main topic we will talk about the prosperity paradox. Of course we will. But since Professor Clayton Christensen passed away the last month, I think it would be nice to talk about him a little bit. You don't mind that?
Sure, happy to.
How you met him?
So I met him when I knew who he was. Everybody knew who he
Of
was,
course.
but in my position, and I had been in a room with him a couple times, but I didn't know him personally. I met him because almost 10 years ago, exactly now, I was the editor of Harvard Business Review, and I was looking for an extra article to put into a special double issue that we had, the July-August double issue, just something that would be different and maybe easy and not too hard. And at that time, interesting today too, because right now when we're talking, the markets are in a downfall. It was in the middle of the coming out of the recession, and I thought it would be interesting to interview Harvard Business School students because that particular class that was going to graduate in 2010 had applied to business school when the market was great, and then once they got into business school, they were fully into the recession. And I was just wondering if in those 2 years at Harvard Business School, out of the workforce, they had recalibrated their goals and what they thought success would look like, knowing that they weren't necessarily coming out into a roaring economy. So in the course of trying to find an article that might be in that vein, some of the students told me that Clayton Christensen had given a talk to the graduating class that they had found really inspiring.
Of course.
So I thought, okay, whatever that is, I'm sure I can turn that into an essay. Let's figure it out. And so I called him up, didn't know him again, and said, can I come over and talk to you about that? Maybe we can turn it into an essay for Harvard Business Review. And he said yes. And, a few days later, I was driving over to Harvard Business School for that appointment. And so it was really sort of circumstance that just was random and weird. And so that was the beginning of us working together for 10 years. We started with that article and we went on for the next decade.
That's amazing. And you're a co-author for many books with him, right?
Yes.
And one of them is How Will you measure your life.
Yes.
Yeah. He said before that, he said Karen managed to translate complex thoughts into something that is both clear and powerful at the same time.
Yeah.
He said that.
Yeah.
That's very nice,
he
right?
said some nice things, but I was always honored to be in the room with him because he has such interesting and fascinating ideas. And I always thought of myself as a proxy for readers in the future. If I get to ask questions, I'm asking them for the future reader, and I'm asking them so I can understand. So I think he and I worked together so well because I became a kind of a bridge to real readers, and I hopefully helped his ideas reach a lot of people.
Something that I have here, the article. I had a book at home, the article, and he said, like, instant telling what to sing, I taught people how to sing, and it's fascinating.
It's a really powerful concept, and having been around him for such a long time now, I see he used to get asked by people in all kinds of industries, all walks of life. I'd be in his office and there'd be a call from some very prominent person in Washington or from the British government or from an industry that he knew nothing about, and he would always say, I don't know anything about your industry, but what I can tell you are the tools that I use. He's used theories to make good decisions, and you can use these theories if it helps you apply it to your own industry.
Right.
So he didn't have to be an expert in everything, but he was an expert in causal mechanisms, what causes what to happen. And so that's the gift he gave people was, I don't know everything about your industry. You'll use this, but here's a tool that you can use to do it yourself.
Yeah, that's amazing. And among many things in this article, they said that who answered that the powerful motivator in our life is no money.
Yes.
Yeah. But speaking about this, why some people only focus on money? I think it's more, he said, it's the opportunity to learn, grow, and responsibilities. Some people focus just on money and knowing and other things, right?
Well, it's the easiest thing to measure, right? We all sort of look at money in our jobs or how much money we have in our life as a kind of measure of how valued we are and how we're doing, versus competitors. But there's a lot of research that will tell you that there's even, I think it's Daniel Kahneman, who has I think it's called the Happiness Index, which will tell you that above a certain salary, I can't remember what the number is now, maybe 80,000 or 85,000, people are no more happy than the people who hit that salary. So this sort of seems to be a diminishing return on, yes, of course, you need enough money to have all your basic needs met, to not be paying the bills. But what Clay's point is that doesn't motivate you to go into work every day and jump out of bed. It means that your life's okay, but it doesn't make you happy in your work. The different things will make you happy in your work, and you have to actively seek those things for you to feel fulfilled in your work. And there are things that we might not think about when we're starting to think about changing jobs or looking for a job. Am I growing? Am I respected by my peers and by my manager? Do I respect them? Do I believe in the mission of this organization? Those kinds of things which you might not think about and you might not even put on your resume with your own experiences are the things that make the difference between us feeling really satisfied and fulfilled and excited by our work and not. Because at the end of the day, I mean, you probably can think of it in your own life. There's probably a time when you got a raise and you were really excited about the raise, but 3 months or 4 months or 5 months later, the raise didn't make a huge difference in how you felt about your job. Exactly. And if you didn't have those other things coming, you maybe don't get out of bed as quickly. You maybe start thinking about the fantasy of what else. If you have those motivators, in addition to the sort of safe quality of life, that's a really powerful combination.
Yeah, that is amazing. And he was a very religious man, right?
He was religious, yeah. He was Mormon. He's Mormon. And what was really fascinating to me was that his life was very intertwined. He didn't keep his religion separate from his teaching and his work. He was a whole man all the time. And I think in that article that we ended up writing for Harvard Business Review, the first one that was called How Will You Measure Your Life, I think it may be the first time that we talked about someone's belief in God in the magazine. And we talked about that editorially at Harvard Business Review. Is that okay to put in the article? And we ended up saying it wasn't about his belief, being one that he was proselytizing to others. It was explaining what was a powerful motivator for him to live a life that had meaning. And so it was just about that being for him an important moment in measuring his life.
And I think the religion has a lot of impact in his life because when he was 16, he said, I want to play any more basketball.
Yes.
And then all the team friends say, no, you have to do that. No. And then he started to
decided because he had always observed the Sabbath, that he was asked to, he was on a basketball team, I think it was at Oxford, it was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, and he was asked to play in it was an intramural or some, I don't know how high it wasn't like it was the NBA, but he was asked to play in a championship game, and all of his teammates said, oh, come on, can't you just this once do it? it. And
said
he
no.
thought about it. And then he decided that if I say yes just this once, this will be the beginning of
he
a
will say yes many
lifetime of
times.
making exceptions to the things that I say I stand for. And as hard as this is and as painful as this is, I'm going to say, no, I have to stand for what I stand for and stand for it all the time. And it was the beginning of him really religiously doing that.
Yeah.
And as he said, they won the game anyway, so maybe he wasn't all that important.
Yeah, but it's a very, very deep, the thing that he did. And something that we are missing right now nowadays, Karen, is the humility.
Yes.
And in this article, he mentioned, and the book as well, the power of be humble.
Oh, it's amazing.
In your opinion, why people are not humble, are so cocky? Because I have 100 followers and then I feel the most powerful man in the world, which is not true, And then tell me what your opinion about the be humble in life.
Well,
based in this.
I loved watching it in him because he was one of the most respected men in the world. I mean,
Correct.
literally in the world.
Yeah.
And he genuinely approached every conversation with someone as, oh, I can learn something from you. He was equally interested in what you had to say. I can still hear him. Isn't that fascinating? Oh, that's really interesting. And it was genuine. It wasn't just a tick. And for him, the power of that humility, it was who he was as a man, which was amazing. But it also meant that his mind was very open to ideas and people and perspectives that he didn't have to come down from the mountaintop with that.
Right.
And it meant that he was very creative and he connected dots that people didn't see because he was listening as much as he was talking, and that was based in his humility. And that was very powerful for him.
It's something that many people have to
Yes.
follow right now. Well, thank you for this. And then now let's talk about this book, The Prosperity Paradox, that I have here. And you see many of know that in the book. Karen, how long to write this book?
So
a lot of research, huh?
It was a lot of research. It was years of research, but the research was started by my co-author, Efosa Ojomo, and Clay before I joined the book. So they were working on it for at least a solid year, I think, before I joined. And the genesis of it, it's really interesting, is that Efosa, who's the co-author, is from Nigeria originally, and he'd come to the U.S. on a scholarship when he was young. He's incredibly smart, and he sort of thought, I'm not going back to Nigeria. I'm going to make my career here. And over time, he ended up not paying so much attention to the troubles back home. And then he read a book and just couldn't get the thoughts out of his mind I think it was called The White Man's Burden. And it was about this image that stuck with him was of a girl who had to get up at 3 a.m. to fetch fire, to get firewood so she could sell it in the market to help her family earn enough money to survive. And he was just so moved by that he started to think, what can I do? And so Efosa was at that point a very successful, I think he was an engineer before he'd gone to business school. And he decided to set up his own not-for-profit called Poverty Ends Now. And he was going to raise money for wells, for water, fresh water in some communities in Nigeria. And he did. He raised money from friends and family, went, and he had the wonderful experience of watching the wells gush water for the first time. And then in the next months ahead, when he was back living in the States, after he had this triumphant visit to set up 5 wells, he would start getting calls that the wells were breaking down. And how am I going to get the well fixed? I'm here in Wisconsin. And over time, I think eventually 4 of the 5 wells stopped working. And it led to him asking the question, which he started asking with Clay, is, well, why is just helping out in really impoverished situations not enough? We tried so hard. We raised money. We gave them water. Why does that not stick? Why is that not solving the poverty problem? So it led to them starting to ask the question. And then I joined with them on what role, if any, can innovation play to helping develop economies? We have so many resources devoted to sort of solving problems in poor countries all over the world, but we're not really moving the needle, not very much.
Exactly.
That was the beginning of the research that took quite a few years to do.
Yeah, I would say it's like a put band-aids.
Yes, exactly.
You know?
Exactly. It is, and that's really hard to hear because we want to help so badly, and people are very happy to know, look at, like the well thing. Efosa's from Nigeria, and he was the triumphant guy going back with the resources. How is this not helpful that I provided this water resource? But in the end, if those things don't become part of the economic fabric of a community, somebody's priorities change, budget dries up, some political will changes, all of those efforts go away, and it's all for nothing. It's not a long-term solution. It's a Band-Aid, as you say.
Yeah, exactly. Karen, something that caught my attention in this book is you guys talk about the struggles. Why struggles represent an enormous potential or opportunities in no-consumption markets, like Mo Ibrahim? Why struggle?
Mo Ibrahim's a great example, and that's a great example of struggles. So what we say in the book is that when you see what people are struggling to accomplish, there may be no product or service at all there, but they're struggling with something in their life is really hard. That should be the beginning clue clue that there's an opportunity for some innovation. And the example that Mo, I think, represents perfectly is that Mo was, I think, the head engineer of British Telecom and then had his own very successful consulting company in the UK. And he recognized that when the sort of Africa continent started to open up for some form of telecommunications, that there would be an enormous opportunity to build mobile telephones there. And most people doubted him at the time because there were so few landlines in different countries in Africa. They're like, how could you possibly get people to pay for mobile phones?
Right.
And so he really had trouble getting people to support it, and he did it on his own, really. And what he recognized is what the struggle was for people who had no phone at all, living in remote parts of Africa. The only way to communicate with people in other parts, who weren't within walking distance, was a long journey or word of mouth through friends, and they didn't have the opportunity for landlines. But maybe something that addressed their struggle, the need for communication in a different way, could be a really high potential innovation. And that's exactly what happened. He really started and developed the mobile telephone network in Africa.
Huge.
It's amazing. He sold it in a few years for billions of dollars in profits, but he had to develop it from scratch because there was nothing there in the mobile telephone community, and he had to market it to people, and it just took off like crazy. So in hindsight, you can see that people were screaming about opportunity with their struggle, right? To communicate with each other, but no one saw it because they only saw consumers who they thought were poor, but they recognized, that in creating a business model that made it affordable, people bought mobile minutes and things like that, you could find a way to address their struggle in a way that they could afford, and it was the beginning of a gigantic market.
Seems that like Africa is now a very important continent. For example, the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, mentioned that Kenya, for example, is doing a great job. And I have to tell you something. I have a friend who went to, I don't remember, he was Malawi, and she's a doctor. No, Tanzania, and find albinism, people who albinism, right? And then they were a population very vulnerable, and she started to work and produce a cream for people with albinism because they are in danger to cancer, the skin. And now he make a company to produce this cream and give a job to people with albinism.
Right.
So which is fantastic. Apparently, when these entrepreneurs that we're going to talk about more, when they see the difficult situations, it's a trigger, right?
Right. It should be. It should be a trigger. It's not saying it's easy, and it's not saying that you can just import a solution that works elsewhere. You have to recognize you're working with a population that may not have the resources, may not have the infrastructure to support it. There's a lot you have to do, but it is a trigger for seeing opportunity as opposed to just seeing poverty or struggle.
Exactly. And now, speaking about these kind of triggers or opportunities, in the book, you guys put down 3 kind of categories.
Yes.
Like one is sustaining. But it's like pretty much, I would say, like the pipeline of the products, that came, normally. Efficiency, like I tweak some stuff that I think they are not working in the organization. And the last one is market creating. It has to be with no consumption. Why this last one is the most important to create this kind of triggers? Let's see.
So exactly. So you talked about the 3 types of innovation that companies traditionally fall into the first 2. Sustaining, meaning, let's come out with a new version of the product and new colors and new sort of little features. So maybe, you'll keep buying us and you'll stay loyal to us. Maybe increase market share a little bit, but not much. Efficiency is, let's try to find ways to make it less expensive for us to make this product so we free up some cash. And so that's when you see companies moving their factory to whatever the lowest place is. Those are both, you need to do those to kind of keep your business sort of running along nicely. Right. But if you really want to grow your company, we talk about that coming through market creating innovations. And what that means is there was no market for this product or service before. You've created it. So you have now created new revenue, new customers, a whole new idea, hopefully a whole new category. And that's the goal. And we think that that market creating innovation, which you see in Africa and Asia, in places where it doesn't seem like it's a high potential audience yet, potential consumers, because it's non-consumption, people who are doing nothing yet for this. Yeah. That's where you can create new revenue dollars, new markets, new opportunities. So if you focus on creating something where there was nothing, it means you have no competitors. There's no one in that space already. And it means that all of what if you find a way to do it profitably, all of what you create is new revenue for you, as opposed to just little tweaks on your existing revenue model.
Yeah, like in the book, there are plenty of case of study, one of them is like this about insurance. I mean, insurance, like Richard Lefty, that when he went to vacation in Zambia, saw these kind of situations. But tell me about this.
So that's a great story too. Richard Lefty is a guy who was in the industry, classic British guy in the insurance and reinsurance industry in London, which is like an old stodgy city of London, a business to be in. And he went on a trip to Malawi, as you talked about, and had ended up having a homestay. And he was just struck by how the people he he met had one thing go wrong in their life, and it was the economic U-turn. They ended up, getting fully sent back into poverty. It might be that somebody's, store burnt down and there was no insurance for that, or their stall, or in this case, he met a family whose the husband had died of AIDS and there was no insurance, and they had spent all of their money on that, and they had to go back to the village. And when he returned to London, it really struck him that if you look at the league table of natural disasters, for example, and where insurance is, they're almost inverse. Like you have very little insurance for people who probably are most vulnerable to natural disasters. And so he started to think about, is there a way I can provide some kind of an insurance product for people who the rest of the insurance world pays no attention to? And it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be tens of hundreds or thousands of dollars of premiums to get tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars back in insurance. It could be that $50 is the difference between being able to get medicine for your family or hospitalized for a couple of days and not. And so he created a product and a company that's very successful now called MicroInsure. It's microinsurance. So it's micro payments. And he really had to figure out a business model that made sense, because when he first started, he was initially a middleman between big insurance companies in the market. He would have to give people brochures that said things like exclude skiing, water skiing, and skydiving. And it was like these people are trying to get to work every day, exactly live. They figured out a way that they could create microinsurance payments back and forth, take payments and return it through your mobile phone. So instead of knowing everything about the person, your age, your next of kin, putting you into an actuarial table to say, it was just, we know that we can send money to your mobile phone number, and we know that we can take payments from your mobile phone, and that's our deal. We'll do it that way. And they've created a huge number. I want to say 60 million people now are insured by a microinsurance product, and it's just the difference between going under or staying afloat. And the way he figured out a business model that made sense too is he figured out how to get the payment was often made by a mobile phone company that wanted to convince their customers to top up minutes. So if you topped up your minutes, you get this basic insurance for the month, and then he hoped to upsell people to get more or whatever. So it didn't even require people to put out money in the beginning. It was sort of a marketing promotion for a mobile phone company.
Yeah, and then two things there. One is the insurance indeed, and then another is the communication through the phone.
Exactly.
Two things in one.
Exactly. And those two things would not be conceivable if you just
for
applied a traditional model. Exactly. Yeah. But it was non-consumption. All of these people had nothing. So he had to think, how am I going to create a product in a completely different context that works for them, maybe as a totally different business model, which this does, and still allows us to be functioning.
Exactly. Let's start another continent, Asia. India. The sanitation in India is a huge problem. Like we said before, put band-aids. And there is a guy, Kamal Kar, to try to fix this kind of problem, because kids are dying, because the children are dying because of sanitation. People are raped because they have to wait until night to go to make, their own things. But he found that to fix the poverty is push a little bit to wealthy communities,
right.
Because put just the toilet, it won't fix the situation. What do you think about it?
Well, they had some really good intentions. It became a national priority to fix sanitation, and so they started doing things like paying towns to put public toilets in place. So what you're talking about being raped and things like that are terrible stories of
true.
People who would women in particular who would wait until the cover of darkness to go into a field to sort of take care of whatever they needed to, and they would be very vulnerable. Children, the same thing. But the problem is simply, we talk about in the book that you can't sort of push solutions on people. They're much more effective when they're pulled, meaning there's a need for it in the community and they want it, and they're struggling and finding a way. And we're talking about it coming through a business need. So if there's a business need for toilets where a factory needs workers to have access because they can't take long times to go out to the field and come back, then that becomes part of the pull. But India was doing what we call a push strategy. They were with very good intentions, just kind of spending money they would even set up toilets that weren't plumbed. They're physical toilets, which is really awful. So I think that's a good example of the good intentions have to be hand in hand with some economic development that requires it, as opposed to it just being a cultural imperative, because you can't push a cultural imperative. A cultural imperative should pull the solutions in.
Yeah, no, it's unbelievable. There is a company, the name is Tolaram. Oh my God, I can imagine how, let's see, a noodle, 2 cents or something like that, $2. Now it's $300 million, half a job, plenty of jobs, ports, warehouse, and they found just because the name is Indomie. Please share this. One of my favorite histories about in Nigeria, and they have Nigeria Hollywood, something like that. They
Yes.
create
Yeah, Nollywood. They call it Nollywood.
Like
So
a Bollywood.
Nigeria is entrepreneurial culture. There are a lot of great stories coming out of Nigeria, but this is such a great one. So 30-ish years ago, Nigerians didn't have noodles in their diet, and Indomie noodles are a little bit like I would call ramen noodles. They're sort of dry
ramen that we
packaged
have,
goods.
yeah.
Exactly. The idea was brought to Nigeria from Indian brothers who I think it came from Singapore originally, and they just started finding a way to create these little 20-cent equivalent packages of dry noodles. Exactly. And in the beginning, it's funny, people thought they were worms. They didn't know what they were because they just were foreign to the diet. But what they began to recognize, again, pull, is that people would recognize that they could take Indomie noodles, maybe add an egg, and kind of create a quick and nutritious meal. It was sort of helped out families and all kinds of people for 20 cents. And so this company started to recognize that their product was becoming very popular. It's actually so popular now that there's a fan club, and if you mention it in certain circles, it's huge. It is really huge. But
it's part of the culture.
It's part of the culture. It is.
Yeah.
And so it's 30 years down the line, it's part of the culture. So with what seems to be the smallest little product, a 20-cent product, because they were so successful and they needed to find ways to get their product out. So they couldn't rely on other distributors. They couldn't rely on exports from other products and services, allowing them to come along. So this is the pull strategy. They started to, okay, we need to set up our own distribution company. Okay, we need to help build a port with our profits. We're going to help to build a port that will help us get our products out more efficiently. So as these needs became business imperatives, they were pulled into the company strategy, and then they became profitable and then created jobs and more jobs in healthcare. So it's really a little 20-cent pack of noodles has done an enormous amount of good for the community.
Unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. It's a great story.
Yeah,
and they're actually very good. I've tried them. They are very good.
Tolerant is the company. Amazing. Well, now, Karen, keeping with this nice conversation, very, very cool. Let's jump to Latin America.
Okay.
Javier Lozano.
Yes.
His mother was, back again, struggling with diabetes.
Yes.
Seems that everybody took very personal the opportunity to help another people, and he found Clínica de Azúcar. His mother is in charge to the telecenter because she suffering the disease or the illness, know how communicate with another people. Now it's 30,000 patients, and 95% receive for first time in their life something about treatment or care about the diabetes, which is awful disease or illness. Tell me about it.
It's such a great story.
Yeah.
It is such a great story. And it's probably even more than that. That's data from a while ago. But so Javier Lozano was a very high potential young man from Mexico and was doing his master's degree here in the United States at MIT, actually. And he was working on a project he got assigned to work on that was looking at some kind of technology related to type 2 diabetes here in the U.S. It was just like with the professor in class. And his mother was a type 2 diabetic in Mexico. And without really thinking too much about it, he called her and kept saying like, oh, all this cool stuff that we're working on here, just sort of throwing, all this cool technology. And then it kind of hit him that he was bragging about all this cool stuff that was available, through the MIT class or that they were working on, but that it's a really big problem at home. And even his mother was so despondent sometimes about her. He was from a family that had means and resources, but type 2 diabetes in Mexico and in many countries, but it was, I think, the number 2 or number 1 killer of people. It's an epidemic and the healthcare system was not adequately responding to people, even when they had resources to have insurance or to get to doctors like her. And at one point, she was just really despondent about her own care. And it clicked to him somehow that he could use what he was learning. This was a struggle, right? His mother was having a hard time controlling her diabetes and felt overwhelmed by it. The family was not very responsive because they were like, you're just eating too much sugar. It's not as simple as that. That he could use the principle of non-consumption, the principle of pull, and he set up Clínicas del Azúcar, which is sugar clinics, which is, I'll call it the McDonald's model. It's basically you buy a membership and you go in to one of their facilities, and everything you need to be taking care of your diabetes you can get in one visit. So it doesn't mean you're sent all over the place. You have to make hard appointments. And it meant that people could get really good care very easily. And what you were talking about is such a great story. So his mom went from being a little despondent about her health prospects, and this is overwhelming to me and I don't know how to take care of it, to recognizing that diabetics would like to talk to another diabetic diabetic about what they're struggling with and staying on top of it. And initially they had like a call center staffed by medical professionals, and they found that people were not as honest with them because they didn't want to disappoint the doctor or the nurse. So his mother has set up, and now she's in charge of the call center where people can call in and talk about what they're struggling with and get help. So she now went from feeling really pessimistic about her own future to she's 3 doors down from her son in the headquarters of the business, and so loving it that he finds it's hard to turn her off talking about the work. But it's a really great, it's a breakthrough thing, and there are other copycat models going on there too.
Yeah.
But that has the potential not only to create jobs, not only to help people,
Exactly,
but to
create jobs.
completely change the sort of dynamic of healthcare in Mexico. And he's one person, but I think what he's already done is just totally amazing.
Yeah, amazing, and start another clinics in the place. As you mentioned, you guys in the book, we should have more outsiders. We have to be part of the solution.
Yes.
And don't give up. The last year I went to Boston College to see the president of Ireland, the former president of Ireland, Mary Robinson, and she talked about climate change.
Right.
Something like that. It's not the case right now, but she said we shouldn't give up. It's like we shouldn't just say, oh my God, this planet is getting burned. No, we have to act and find the solutions, because we don't have to sing in poverty. We have to sing in prosperity.
Exactly. If you can see struggle and you have ideas, you can become part of the solution, because once you help create prosperity, as opposed to just temporarily solving poverty, you're creating an engine that can continue to create jobs and opportunities and build economies.
Yeah, it's a very intense topic. I love that it's kind of the things of entrepreneurship and innovation, etc. Karen, finally, market creating innovation can solve many problems.
Yes.
Tell me, it's a random question. Why, when we talk about innovation, the people think immediately in technology?
Because it's sort of sexy, and we equate it with Silicon
Trendy.
Valley. Exactly, but it is trendy. And all those things are true. It's fun. Innovation we all see, in our phones every day, and how we live our life. A lot of that is through technology. But innovation, like Tolaram, that was an innovation right there. I mean, and that's
this is
changed
innovation.
the country. Exactly. So innovation doesn't have to come in the form of technology or a completely new product or service. It can be about the way we deliver something to someone, the business model, like microinsurance. Insurance is not a new product, but they did find a way to, through the mobile phone, technology was involved, but it's disruptive, exactly. And so some of the best disruptive innovations are ones that start low and crappy. They're not a very good product or service, not a high-tech solution at all, but they get better over time. So it's a mistake to limit yourself to thinking that technology is the only path to innovation. There are many ways to do it that involve just seeing the struggle and solving it.
Exactly. Karen, we are almost done in this conversation. Anything that you would like to add to this conversation about you are author of plenty of books with Professor Clayton Christensen? Anything that you would like to add?
I would just like to say that he cared so profoundly about sharing ideas for other people to go out, and his contribution was, as you say, the theories or the what, not what to think, but the how. I hope people get inspired from the work that he's given the world to become their own change agent, to find ways themselves, see opportunities themselves, because only one man and one set of theories can only go so far. But when other people are energized and mobilized by the idea, so much is possible. So I hope it inspires people to look at the books as a source of some inspiration and some ideas, so that they can go out and do things themselves.
It's true. It's the thing that I saw this, I finished the book, and then, yes, you have to grab the inspiration from the histories.
Yes.
Karen, where people can find more about Karen Dillon?
Oh, well, you can follow me on Twitter at AKAR Dillon, AKAR Dillon, and you can follow me on KarenDillon.net.
Okay. Karen, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. I am JC Giraldo from Boston, Massachusetts, and thank you so much, everyone.